You are listening to A Light to the Nations. This podcast is a production of the Ephesus School Network.
Hello, and welcome to a special episode of A Light to the Nations. I'm your host, Father Fred Shaheen. This episode is a reflection on the Old Testament readings for the Feast of the Annunciation as celebrated in the Orthodox Church. At Vespers, on the eve of the feast, we hear from three Old Testament texts: Genesis chapter 28, verses 10 through 17, Ezekiel 43, verses 27 through 44, verse 4, and Proverbs chapter 9, verses 1 through 11. One thing that all of these readings have in common is the presence of the word house, which in Hebrew is beit, a word whose original meaning can be either house or household, depending on the function. Thus we have tension in the reading from Genesis chapter 28, which is revealed in verse 18, in which Jacob sets up a pillar of stone, anoints it with oil, and calls it the house of God. Let's begin by hearing the text of Genesis chapter 28, verse 10, and going all the way through verse 18. Now Jacob went out from Beersheba and went toward Haran. So he came to a certain place and stayed there all night, because the sun had set. And he took one of the stones of that place and put it at his head, and he lay down in that place to sleep. Then he dreamed, and behold, a ladder was set up on the earth, and its top reached to heaven, and there the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and your descendants. Also your descendants shall be as the dust of the earth. You shall spread abroad to the west and the east, to the north and the south. And in you and in your seed all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have spoken to you. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid and said, How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. Then Jacob rose early in the morning, and took the stone that he had put at his head, set it up as a pillar, and poured oil on top of it.
In the reading from Proverbs tonight, we heard wisdom hath builded herself a house, and hath established 7 pillars. In the reading from Ezekiel, we heard that he brought me by the way of the north gate of the sanctuary before the house, and I looked, and behold, the house of the Lord was full of glory. And in the first reading from Genesis, how dreadful is this place! This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. We're inundated with this word house in the Old Testament readings tonight. In the Hebrew, that word beit means house, but it also has another meaning. It means house in the sense of a structure, a place where you live, a building made of stone, made of brick or wood, the place you live in. But the other meaning is the people who live in the house. It's your people. It's your, what we call a household. We even say that in English. And when God spoke to Jacob, and he reiterated the blessing that he gave to Abraham, and he said, I will give you this land. And he described the land, how far it spread to the north, the south, and the east, and the west. And he said, in your seed shall all the tribes of the earth be blessed. God was speaking about the household that God was going to give Jacob as an inheritance. But Jacob didn't hear that. We know that. He heard it the first way. He heard of a house that you live in, that you build, a house that Jacob, he himself would build. We know that because in the next verses that we didn't get to tonight, it says that Jacob woke up from his dream and he took the pillow that his head had been laying on at night and he set it up as a pillar, and he poured oil on top of it. And he said, "This is the house of God." This is Bethel. He named it Bethel. It had previously been called Luz. In other words, Jacob started to build a temple. And that's foreshadowing what David will do later when we get to 2 Samuel. This is way before that, but already the seeds of temple building are in the biblical story. In 2 Samuel, it's David who says, "I'm going to build a house for the ark of the Lord." Even though the ark of the Lord, in other words, the ark that contains his law with his statutes and its commandments, had been preserving and protecting the people throughout all their wanderings into the wilderness, and even preceded them in crossing the Jordan when they entered Canaan. It's the Lord who protects us. But David wanted to build a protection for the Lord in making a house for the ark, and that's the beginning of the building of the temple, which would be completed under his son Solomon, which in the biblical story, the Old Testament part, that's really the beginning of the end with the construction of the temple. So if we forward to the New Testament, we hear in the Gospel of Luke, in this beautiful passage we're going to hear at liturgy for the Feast of Annunciation, the angel Gabriel tells us how God is going to redress that situation of human beings thinking they can do for God, they can build for God, they can make temples and somehow protect what God has given us. Because Gabriel tells Mary, "You will conceive in your womb and bear a son, and his name will be called Jesus. He will be great. He will be called the Son of the Most High God. And the Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will rule over the house of Jacob and forever, and of his kingdom there shall be no end." See the mention of the house of Jacob, which is that inheritance which was given to Abraham and to his seed, and it's repeated to Isaac, and it's repeated to Jacob every time God has an encounter with them. So in the Feast of the Annunciation, this is coming to fruition, not the way we see it, or the way Jacob understood it in that passage, but the way God intends it to be. He's making an inheritance for his people, a blessing that comes through what he is providing for us, and what that is Jesus Christ, who is born of the Virgin Mary, who accepts the news. So in a way, Jacob kind of had it right when he saw the ladder. That is the way to heaven, but it wasn't in the way he was thinking. It wasn't in the stone pillar. It was in what God was going to provide for him in a household, a blessing, a people that is the inheritance of God. And Jesus Christ is the fruition of that. He's the end of that promise. He's the product of it. So we who belong to him, we end up sharing in that inheritance.